The focus is once again on China's electric vehicle industry. On December 10th, Mexico's Congress passed a bill with overwhelming support, deciding to impose new tariffs of up to 50% on imported goods from several Asian countries, including China. They start from January 1st, 2026. Chinese products are the most affected, with Chinese cars facing the highest levels of tariffs at 50%, steel, toys, and motorcycles to 35%, and textiles will face tariffs ranging from 10 to 50%, depending on the type. As the largest export source, China is the hardest hit. Why has Mexico, once seen as a stepping stone for Chinese goods, suddenly raised tariffs against China? Analysts point out that this move echoes the stance of the Trump administration in tightening trade restrictions on China, aiming at closing loopholes in transshipment trade and protecting Mexico's domestic industries. China is unhappy with Mexico's decision to raise tariffs. The Chinese government has strongly condemned the measure, previously warning Mexico to think carefully and criticizing actions that restrict China under various pretenses due to external pressure, implicitly referring to the Trump administration's influence. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum denied that the tariff increase was meant to please Washington. She stated that this measure would help boost Mexico's domestic manufacturing, a key focus of her administration, while also reducing Mexico's huge trade deficit with China. Currently, Mexico imports relatively few goods from China. Washington has significant influence over Mexico. The U.S. and Mexico are each other's largest trade partners, with bilateral trade reaching $840 billion last year, 7 times the trade value between Mexico and China. Previously, the Trump administration urged Mexico to raise tariffs on Chinese imports to curb the flow of cheap Chinese goods into the U.S. Mexican officials proposed the Fortress North America concept, aimed at limiting Chinese imports while strengthening trade and manufacturing cooperation between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. On December 4th, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer emphasized the need to strengthen enforcement of the USMCA. He stated that the key was ensuring that Mexico and Canada do not become transshipment hubs for Chinese, Vietnamese, or Indonesian goods into the U.S. How will Mexico's tariff adjustment impact China's exports? China is Mexico's second-largest trade partner. According to Chinese customs data, the total trade between China and Mexico reached $109.4 billion in 2024, with Chinese exports valued at $90.2 billion and imports at $19.2 billion, resulting in a trade deficit of $71 billion for China. From January to October 2025, China exported $73 billion worth of goods to Mexico, a 6.3% decrease compared to the previous year, while Mexico's exports to China reached $17 billion, a 6.3% increase, reducing the trade deficit to $56.8 billion, a 5.2% decrease. Mexico's tariff adjustment plan will have a multifaceted impact on Chinese exports. First, this policy change will deal a significant blow to Chinese car brands, such as BYD, Chang'an, and Great Wall Motors, which have performed strongly in the Mexican market. In recent years, China's automotive industry, backed by government subsidies and aggressive low-price strategies, has experienced explosive growth. In 2024, BYD sold about 40,000 cars in Mexico, accounting for about nearly half of all pure electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles sold in the country. By the end of August this year, BYD's sales in Mexico had doubled. Furthermore, Chinese automakers have attempted to bypass tariff barriers by localizing production. For example, BYD had planned to set up a factory in Mexico, but the project was postponed due to U.S. pressure and the uncertainty of trade policies. According to data from the China Passenger Car Association, Mexico has replaced Russia as the top destination for China's car exports. In 2024, Chinese cars accounted for 29% of Mexico's imported vehicles. From January to October 2025, China exported 483,000 cars to Mexico, a 25% increase compared to the previous year. Undoubtedly, after Mexico raises tariffs in January 2026, the competitiveness of Chinese cars in the Mexican market will decline sharply. This will significantly impact demand for Chinese cars, possibly leading to a 40% drop in export volume. In the Chinese automotive industry, the phenomenon of internal competition has become extreme. Over 100 local brands are fighting for market share in the world's largest but slowing market. The price war has turned into a brutal survival game. With global trade barriers continuing to rise and domestic competition reaching a boiling point, some companies may face the fate of being killed by the competition. In short, Mexico's tariff increase marks the rapid closing of the window for China's chaotic expansion into the automotive sector. Secondly, the steel, textile, and parts industry will also be affected. These measures are intended to protect Mexico's 325,000 industrial and manufacturing jobs. In recent years, Mexico's light vehicle and auto parts industries have been particularly impacted by China's low-priced products. In the short term, after the tariff increase, China's total exports to Mexico may decrease by $15 to $20 billion, leading to compressed profits and disruptions in the supply chain. Thirdly, more countries may follow Mexico's lead and raise tariffs on Chinese goods to limit Chinese re-export trade to the U.S., which could trigger a global chain reaction of trade barriers against China. For example, as a USMCA partner, Canada is likely to follow Mexico's example and impose additional tariffs on Chinese goods, particularly in the automotive and steel sectors. Similarly, European Union countries may follow suit. From January to November 2025, China's exports to the EU increased by 8.1% year-on-year, while imports from the EU dropped by 2.1%, resulting in a trade surplus of $266.8 billion, a 19.6% year-on-year increase. In recent years, the trade deficit between the EU and China has continued to grow, leading to a series of frictions and disputes. France, as a core EU member, saw its president Emmanuel Macron express dissatisfaction with the situation during his visit to China from December 3rd to 5th, when he called for a tougher European stance. What should have been an opportunity to strengthen bilateral cooperation quickly turned into a signal of trade protectionism, highlighting deep-seated contradictions in Sino-European economic interactions. France's trade deficit with China surged to $10.6 billion in the first 10 months of 2025, a significant increase compared to the $9.4 billion deficit for the entire year of 2024. This imbalance is not an isolated phenomenon, as the entire EU's trade deficit is also rapidly expanding. France's main exports to China include dairy products, wine, cosmetics, and luxury goods. While these high-end consumer goods are competitive, they're insufficient to offset the flood of electrical appliances, machinery, furniture, and electric vehicles. Chinese-made electric vehicles in particular are penetrating the European market rapidly, using price advantages and technological advancements to swiftly erode the market share of local brands. After returning from his visit to China, President Macron gave an exclusive interview to French media, issuing a warning that the EU's trade deficit with China had exceeded 300 billion euros in 2024. If Beijing does not address this imbalance, the EU plans to impose additional tariffs on China in the next few months. He openly stated that the EU-China trade deficit is unsustainable. China's failure to import a large amount of goods from Europe is, in essence, killing its own customers, because this is a one-way trade model that is eroding Europe's consumer capacity and industrial foundation. Macron warned that Europe's industrial pillar is facing a life-or-death crisis, as the rise of Chinese industry is striking at the core of European industrial and innovation models. In the interview, he compared this pressure to the protectionist policies of the Trump administration in the U.S., noting that Europe has found itself in a catch-22 situation, becoming a victim of global trade adjustments. It is noteworthy that Macron's statement is not without foundation, as it is based on the ongoing anti-subsidy investigation by the European Commission. The investigation aims to determine whether China's electric vehicle industry is gaining an unfair competitive advantage due to government subsidies. If the conclusion is affirmative, the EU will impose punitive measures, further escalating trade barriers. Have seen a surge in sales in Europe, relying on efficient supply chains and ultra-low prices, causing local factories to underutilize their capacity and leading to job losses. Analysts believe that if the EU raises tariffs, it will trigger a new round of trade friction between China and Europe, similar to the 2018 US-China trade war, but on a larger scale. Electric vehicles are at the core of the global green transformation. The tariffs will not only increase the import costs of Chinese electric vehicles, but may also push European consumers toward domestic products. Macron's stance seems to unite EU member states and push Brussels to adopt unified protectionist measures. The EU has a broad array of trade defense tools, from foreign investment reviews to anti-dumping duties. Reports indicate that the EU's executive body will propose new guidelines to strengthen the EU's market protection. While specific details were not provided, it is expected that the EU may focus on supporting domestic industries through local content standards and public procurement policies. Goldman Sachs economists have concluded in their latest forecasts that China's economic interdependence with other regions of the world has turned into a negative correlation. As one rises, the others fall. Due to the Communist Party's push to further enhance and promote exports, its economic growth model will face increasing resistance from Europe, other industrial economies in East Asia, Canada, and Mexico. An economic axiom is that when two entities trade, both benefit, but this theory is based on a free, rules-based world order. After more than 20 years of joining the World Trade Organization, China has leveraged international free trade to become the world's second-largest economy and largest exporter. However, the Chinese Communist Party follows a fundamentally different economic ideology. In particular, current CCP leader Xi Jinping's emphasis on China's dual circulation strategy seeks to reduce China's dependence on international industrial chains while ensuring domestic production independence and self-sufficiency. China does not abandon low-end manufacturing industries like toys and clothing, nor does it encourage Chinese companies investing abroad to transfer key technologies, such as battery production techniques. On December 4th, the Trump administration released its National Security Strategy Report, which called for rebalancing the economic relationship between the U.S. and China, prioritizing reciprocity and fairness to restore America's economic independence. The report stated that trade with China should remain balanced and focused on non-sensitive sectors. The U.S. also encouraged its allies to correct their unbalanced trade relationships with the Chinese Communist Party. We have made it clear to our allies that America's current account deficit is unsustainable. We must encourage Europe, Japan, Korea, Australia, Canada, Mexico, and other prominent nations in adopting trade policies that help rebalance China's economy towards household consumption, because Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East cannot alone absorb China's enormous excess capacity. As the CCP's economic model continues to create imbalances globally to adopt tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers, the CCP's refusal to address overcapacity issues and its relentless pursuit of this path will only lead to worsening trade conflicts with other countries. On December 8, 2025, the Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) Ministerial Committee officially approved the imposition of final anti-dumping duties on automotive-starting lead-acid batteries originating from or imported from China. However, according to GCC practice, the tax rate range typically falls between 30% and 200%, which will significantly increase the landing cost of Chinese products in the region. The GCC includes the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. It is an important political and economic organization in the Gulf region. This decision marks the conclusion of an anti-dumping investigation that began in August 2024 and is one of the most significant trade relief measures taken by Gulf countries against Chinese battery products in recent years. The Gulf countries cited two main reasons for the decision: a sharp increase in imports and prices below normal value. The 6 GCC nations believe that Chinese products are flooding the market at below normal value prices, severely impacting local industries. Currently, China is the world's largest producer and exporter of lead-acid starting batteries. From January to October 2024, exports to the Middle East surpassed the entire volume for 2020. While the GCC market accounts for about 6 to 8% of China's total exports, it is profitable and often serves as a gateway to North Africa and South Asia. The imposition of anti-dumping duties will force Chinese companies to reevaluate their market strategies in the Middle East, with some small and medium-sized businesses likely to exit the market. In other words, the CCP's dumping practices may not last long, as international markets are closing to them. With insufficient domestic demand, the CCP's economic model is unlikely to continue. On December 9th, Professor Qiu Wanjun of the Department of Finance and Financial Engineering at Northeastern University in Boston commented to media that the CCP's price wars have completely disrupted global economic order, causing serious contraction in labor markets, damaging labor rights, and leading to the loss of innovation capability in manufacturing industries in other countries. He believes that the CCP's trade model has inherent contradictions. The first issue is the collapse of domestic consumption in China, with severe deflation problems. The people are afraid to spend, and businesses are afraid to invest. The second issue is overcapacity, where the economy can only be stimulated through exports. Industries like steel, electric vehicles, and solar panels are all dependent on this. Of course, this is related to the political system. The CCP's long-standing economic growth thinking has always focused on production over consumption. Qiu Wanjun pointed out that since the COVID-19 pandemic, countries have focused on de-risking their supply chains, and a global trade bloc is emerging. The EU trade bloc and the US trade bloc are becoming more aligned, While the CCP's trade bloc is part of Xi Jinping's dual circulation strategy, which includes countries like Russia, Iran, as well as North Korea, African nations, and other economically weaker countries that are forced to accept China's threats and temptations. However, countries in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East are trying to avoid offending both sides and benefit from both, especially India, which is currently working to balance its position between China, Russia, the US, and the EU. Qiu Wanjun believes that the CCP's strong export strategy will not go far. The assumption behind strengthening exports is that foreign markets will demand these products, but ultimately, economic prosperity relies on domestic consumption. In China, the profits from exports are not shared with the public. The people cannot enjoy the benefits of economic growth, so the more China exports and the more it produces, the weaker domestic demand becomes, leading to a vicious cycle where more exports are needed. Once international trade barriers are raised, China's exports will face obstacles.
When it comes to maintaining prostate and breast health, you deserve a proactive approach, one that supports wellness from within. Introducing Best Doctors WBM Rex, your natural supplement to support prostate and breast health, boost immune function, and enhance overall wellness. Packed with powerful ingredients like white button mushrooms, noto ginseng, and antioxidants, WBM Rex helps maintain healthy PSA levels, reduces inflammation, and supports cellular health in the prostate and breast. With added energy-boosting Panax noto ginseng and immune-boosting beta-glucans, WBM Rex helps you stay active, healthy, and full of vitality. Clinically backed and made with plant-based ingredients, WBM Rex is your go-to solution for long-term wellness and balance. Gift the joy of health this Christmas with WBM Rex, because the well-being of your loved ones matters. And don't forget, use our special discount code CO2025 at checkout to get 20% off your order, exclusively for our China Observer viewers.